Okay. Our speaker tonight is Dr. David James, and he will talk about Washington's butterfly species of greatest conservation need. As most of you know, David is a professional entomologist and has conducted several research projects on migrating monarchs and also Coronis fritillaries. He has also been working to understand some of Washington's most imperiled butterflies and has undertaken a field project to collect data to understand distributions and abundance, but also to identify what conservation strategies might be most effective. So he'll talk about that this evening. As always, thank you so much, David, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Paulette, for inviting me. Yeah, this is a project that's at the beginning, so this is very much an introductory type of talk. I mean, I did spend a lot of time in the field last summer looking at some of these species, but there's a lot more that we need to do, I think. But anyway, without further ado, so we have about 150 species of butterflies in Washington, and 21 of them are on the species of greatest conservation need list, which is a list developed by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And 10 of these are subspecies that occur in Western Washington, all the ones that are listed there. And I won't be talking about them. I mean, 21 species is way more than I could investigate in a single season, obviously. And being on the west side and me being on the east side, they're not my highest priority. But 11 of them are full species. And we could argue about whether full species are more important than subspecies. I think they're all important, to be honest. But, full species maybe are slightly, excuse me, slightly more important. And a lot of these have their own subspecies as well, of course. So they're all listed there. The ones in yellow are the focus of my current studies. And again, I think I investigated 4 of the 5 this year. And I'll talk mostly about these with the information that I gathered, and also a bit of the history of them and what we know about them generally, of course. So on to the first one. It's like old times. I'm always talking about the monarch. But it is one of the WDFW species of greatest conservation need. And it's not your typical species of greatest conservation need. All the others are resident in Washington and they don't leave. But the monarch, of course, just spends its summer holidays here and spends most of the year outside of Washington in California, mostly. So it is a very different butterfly to be considered as a species of greatest conservation need within Washington. And of course, that's going to be usurped soon by the fact of federal legislation, which I'll talk about in a minute. But, so this year, it's like, well, I normally talk about the monarch in terms of what's been happening recently. And so I can say that, and I'm still monitoring, obviously. We saw, well, there were 23 confirmed sightings in Washington this past summer, compared to 79 last year and 81 the year before. So it was a poor year for monarchs in Washington, unfortunately. But this is typical. We have our ups and downs. So as I briefly mentioned, last December, Fish and Wildlife, US Fish and Wildlife, proposed Endangered Species Act protection for the monarch butterfly. And that will be completed this coming December after comments have been gathered, etc. And it may stay the same as they outlined last December, or it may be modified in some way. I'm hoping it's not modified too much in the wrong direction. And if you want to know my opinion on this, on our WABA website opening page, I think it's still there. There's my comments. But it was pleasing to me to see in the initial announcement that the Fish and Wildlife Service urged increased public engagement to help save the species. They recognize the importance of people basically. And that's one of my messages I've been, presenting all along, the fact that we can't just say hands off, don't touch, go away. We have to be part of it. So I hope so that's why I'm not too upset by the current form of legislation, and I hope it doesn't become more draconian. So you're going to see a lot of iNaturalist slides this evening, and you all know probably, or some of you know, that I'm a great advocate of iNaturalist, um, particularly in terms of recent data. Obviously, iNaturalist doesn't go back too far, and I'm only a recent convert. 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's not long anyway. So the data we get from iNaturalist is fairly contemporary. It's populated by observations taken in the last few years. There's been an incredible increase in observations and people participating on iNaturalist in the last 2 years. It's like doubling every couple of years, people involved. So ultimately, it's going to be, even more good, better than it is now. Um, so take that, when I show iNaturalist slides, remember that it is fairly contemporary, not long-term data. So for the monarch, currently there's 124. Actually, there was maybe another one today. So not too many, but you can see the distribution there. And of course, unfortunately, a lot of observations, etc., they follow people. People are doing the observing, and unless the people go out in the wild, remote places, which they sometimes do, like I do, most of the observations from well-populated areas. So you could, interpret what you see there as being the Tri-Cities down there, Spokane, cluster of observations, and maybe these middle ones here are more representative. But so anyway, and the monarch has been recorded in 32 counties. That's 82% of Washington counties. So all my county data comes from John Pelham, of course. So I'm currently in the process of submitting a paper that I've just written along with Tonya on the populations of monarchs in the Pacific Northwest from 2012 to 2024. And this was using data from iNaturalist, but also the other reporting bodies, sites like the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, Journey North, and also personal communication, social media. I seem to be known as Mr. Monarch in the Pacific Northwest. So I do get lots of emails from people that have seen a monarch, ever since I arrived in this country, actually, 25 years ago. So and I keep all my emails. And so that was a good source of data as well. And also social media in recent years, Facebook pages. There's many, social media sources for monarch sightings, and all the data we used was confirmed sightings, so associated with photographs or made by experienced people. So you can see there over the period of time, just look at the top line, which summarizes all the data. So that's the total, and all the separate lines of the different sources below. But if you just look at the top line, you can see there's ups and downs. There's periods of 3 or 4 years of abundance and 3 or 4 years of lower abundance. It's a shame it's only talking about 12 years, but maybe this is what is quite normal. The most recent abundance may have been blown out a bit by iNaturalist being far more used now, and other reporting, Facebook sites and stuff. People are just more invested in monarch observations than they were 12 years ago. So that might explain why we got such a big peak in 2022, 23. It's the same with immatures too. So we have this cyclic nature of the population. We also looked at the different states. So you can see Washington there is below Oregon in the number of sightings. This data is from the whole period of observation, about half of what Oregon gets. Same pretty much as Idaho. and BC, British Columbia, much less. And that sort of represents the thinning of the population as they travel north. That was one of the problems this year. It thinned out way too soon for Washington because the starting population was so small. And then, interestingly, I've looked at the way. I mean, I'm always getting people from Western Washington telling me about the lights they see as well. So, separating those sightings out, you can see the same sort of trend. You've got lots of, well, relatively more sightings on the west side during the good periods, 2015 to 2018 and 21 to 24, and virtual absence in the low population years. So, just showing that, that they do travel through the west side and are seen by people, which is something that hasn't really been accepted in the literature or by many people. It tends to, people tend to think it's a. I still get emails saying, "Do we see monarchs in Puyallup or on the west side?" And and I say, yes. If you wait long enough, you'll see a monarch come by. So they do occur there. And so if you compare the annual sightings, that we collected with the overwintering populations, you can see that it follows the same trend, which, is good confirmation of the fact that our population does contribute to the overwintering populations, which of course we now know through our tracking program anyway. But it's nice to see verification of that, looking at the summer breeding populations too. And that, it was important. I think it's important to publish this stuff because summer breeding populations don't get the same attention as winter populations. So it's a void. There are no data. Even on the eastern side of the US, summer breeding population data published is not as common as you might expect. So the current status of monarchs in Washington, well, really, we're totally dependent on the survival and development of populations in California, both overwintering and the early spring generation. If those populations do well, it means we get good populations in the Pacific Northwest. So the times that the monarch is away from Washington is a critical time for the butterfly, and it really dictates as to what we see in the following summer. So, last year was the second lowest overwintering population recorded. And so we knew that it was going to be an uphill climb to, have good populations in the summer in the Pacific Northwest. And that's what happened. But, the converse of that is that our conditions in Washington and the rest of the Pacific Northwest can influence the size and success of the migratory and overwintering populations. And I'll talk more in a minute about what happened last year, which is partly why the overwintering populations were so small. So we do, how successful breeding is in the summer does determine the size of the overwintering population. Not just us, of course, but, Nevada, Utah, the whole of the western area, Arizona as well. How successful the butterflies are during the summer plays a big role in in the size of the overwintering populations.
So, David, before you go on, may I just ask one question? Many of us are familiar with your work on the monarchs, and you're talking about a particular population, not all of North America, the Western population. Can you just clarify that and the overwintering in California as opposed to, for example, Mexico?
Yes, sure. I mean, the Western population overwinters in California mostly. We still have some question marks about that. Some the far eastern side of the Pacific Northwest, i.e., Idaho and Utah, some may actually go down to Mexico. And we know that some of Arizona's butterflies go to Mexico. So there is that. But most of our population west of the divide overwinters in California, whereas the eastern US population overwinters in Mexico. Is that where you're getting at?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted that clarification.
Okay. So back to last year when last summer we had prolonged heat. So this year we didn't get prolonged heat. We had hot days, we had 100-degree days, but I checked the data the other day. In Eastern Washington, 100-degree days did not last more than 2 days. So it just came and then went, came then went. But sometimes, like last July, it can go on for 2 weeks. 100 degrees every day. And that's when the monarch suffers, and probably other butterflies too, but that's another story. So when there's prolonged heat, we do see this suppression in populations, and we saw that last year. The reason we get this, I think, and also it depends on with the timing of this prolonged heat. If it coincides with eggs and young larvae, you get the increased mortality. They're very vulnerable, and there's lab work to back this up. Eggs and larvae, first instars, second instars, third instars, are very vulnerable to prolonged heat. And so if that happens, you do get a substantial reduction in the population. And that's, I believe, what happened last year and a contributor to the tiny overwintering population. So this is a confusing graph, I know, but it's comparing 3 years, 22, 23, and 24. So I guess if you look at 24, you can see there in August, way down compared to the other 2 years where there's a reasonable number. And this is based on weekly number of sightings through all the sources again. And because people are so active, there's enough sightings weekly to make this a real thing. And so basically the number of sightings in 2024 just bottomed out in like the third week, I think it was, of August. And it was really noticeable. I wondered where all the sightings gone. And it was because that generation that had been developing had suffered from the prolonged heat. I mean, I can't prove it, but that appears to be what happened. The population crashed. I mean, maybe there was involvement of predators as well. Maybe the predators did better under the heat conditions. Who knows? But the bottom line is the population did crash. And as you can see there, it sort of mainline just slowly went up a little bit in September and continued along. But if you look at 2022, early September, we were getting 60, 70 sightings a week compared to last year when we were getting one or two. So there was a big difference between those 3 years. And looking at the weather data, the only big difference is the prolonged heat wave that we had during July. It was almost the whole month in places like the Tri-Cities, where it was 95 to 105 every day. So that's an interesting thing that we tend not to think about too much, but it's, I think, in our environment in Eastern Washington, it is a critical part of their life history. And this heat, by the way, wasn't just us. California had the hottest July on record, and other parts of the West were also similarly heat struck. So it seemed, and because the overwintering population crashed, it seems that it probably was a common root cause throughout the region. So getting onto the conservation in Washington, what are the needs and strategies? Well, climate buffering, is the obvious thing from what I've just said. Obviously, we can't change the climate overnight, but we can buffer it to some extent because a lot of the milkweed habitats in Washington are shadeless. They're out in the open. So the provision of shade trees in milkweed habitats would go a long way to buffer extreme heat. And you can base this on observations because I've seen it. Adult monarchs do abandon exposed milkweed habitats when temperatures exceed 95. They stop being active. I mean, they may be active early in the day and late in the day, but for the rest of the time they go. And at Crab Creek, which is one of my sites that I've spent a lot of time at over the years, I've actually seen them on very hot days in summer exodus the site. You can see them leaving the site almost in a single file. They're just heading towards the river. So they don't like heat. So this slide shows Crab Creek, and you see milkweed in the foreground, and you can see some trees in the back. And so the monarchs in a situation like this would go to the trees. And and then, during July and August, when it is very hot, um, they spend most of the time in the trees, and they will actually lay their eggs on the milkweed under the trees. And there's an example. Here's the monarch in the middle laying its egg on milkweed, and you can see the milkweed there, which is actually showy milkweed, but it looks nothing like it because it's in the shade. They they grow differently because of the lack of sunlight. But it's still fine for the monarch to feed on. I've found larvae and eggs, and they seem to develop fine. And the females hang out there when the temperatures are too high. They leave again early in the morning to nectar, and come probably in the evening too. But they spend most of the day under these conditions. So this is one obvious conservation strategy, is to make sure that milkweed habitats do have shade nearby. Um, so it's what is needed, and progressively going to be needed more as our temperatures increase. So there's another shot there. So even milkweed has trouble surviving in exposed non-riparian locations. This is Crab Creek again, away from the creek and any wetter area. It just dies off by August. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the provision of mid to late summer nectar resources. Um, and I've spoken before in my monarch talks about the value of this noxious weed, purple loosestrife, because sometimes it's the only nectar available. Crab Creek is a good example of that. In years past, it has been the only source of nectar. And I'm not talking about huge areas of purple loosestrife, just a few plants here and there is sufficient for the butterflies to get their nectar need, and it's not causing great environmental impact on the landscape. So there's room for some noxious weeds, and this is going to be a slightly familiar theme through the rest of this talk as well, both the shade and the provision of nectar. And this all stems from our extreme hot, dry climate in Washington, eastern Washington. But there are native options, and this is, so if we want to do something about it, conservation needs and conservation strategies, we can go and plant some native plants that don't always, they're not always at the milkweed sites. Things like blanket flower, all heat, drought adapted, and would do fine if they were there. And the monarchs would love them. They'd use them, just as much as purple loosestrife or anything else, as you probably mostly all know. They're generalists. Monarchs are generalists in terms of the nectar they use. It's only the fact that they need milkweed for their larvae makes them sort of semi-specialist. The buckwheat, the tall buckwheat, which we're all very familiar here in Washington and Wabba people, we all know Eriogonum. It's a plant, this one in particular, tall buckwheat, provides nectar from the end of May to beginning of October. I mean, I saw pollinators on the tall buckwheat earlier this week. It's a remarkable nectar source, and we need to try and get it occurring at some of these sites that don't have milkweed. And there's others too. Just showing a few examples here. Sunflowers is a good one. I noticed in Idaho, where a lot of their monarch habitats are very similar to ours, hot and dry, riparian. Sunflowers there, for some reason, are much more abundant. They're not so abundant in Washington in the monarch habitat sites. Not sure why, but we could try to rectify that, along with any other kind of native flowering plant. Plants that flower late in the season too, and I'm talking sort of mid-July to early September. That's the critical period when they run out, the monarchs run out of nectar. Milkweed often hangs on at these sites till mid-July, and that's always their favoured nectar. But after that, things go downhill pretty quickly. So the milkweed habitats, we hear of the call to establish milkweed habitats. We're pretty fortunate in Washington. We have a lot of milkweed habitats where it will grow. There's a lot of places that we don't have it because it just won't grow. The hot, dry areas, sagebrush areas. It's the riparian zones that it will grow at. And most of those places do have milkweed already. It's just that some of them are not suitable in terms of shade and nectar resources. So if we want to do something to enhance the habitat, these, this will be the first two things to do, shade and nectar. However, I'm not telling people not to grow milkweed in their garden or anywhere else. Come to that. And I-82, the highway between Tri-Cities and Yakima is a good example of that, where 10 years ago with the pollinator initiative, the Transport Authority decided, or as part of what they wanted to do for pollinators was to leave milkweed along the roadside. And so now it's a wonderful resource all along the highway, from Yakima to the Tri-Cities in the summer is milkweed until it senesces. So that's great. And so it's extra monarch habitat, and people can provide their own extra monarch habitat. And it's important, and it gets back again to creating and reinforcing the human monarch relationship that is so important for the future conservation of this icon and insects in general. People don't know about monarchs and insects and experience them for themselves, see what they do. They're not going to care about them in the future. And these, I'm talking mostly about young people here. And the young people, the people going to legislate in the future and decide whether we conserve things or not. So, I think it's very short-sighted not to realize that is probably one of the most important things we can do in terms of conservation of insects and butterflies in particular. So for that reason alone, I'm all for people getting involved with creating monarch habitat, and even rearing them themselves. And some people might not agree with that, but you can't take that away from people, I believe. You shouldn't. And finally, for the monarch and actually this is a message for all the species, of course, is reducing pesticide use. And I hope most of you listening don't use pesticides anyway, because it really, in a home garden situation, is not, apart from, very rare circumstances, it's really not necessary. You can manage pests, and talking as an entomologist with my other hat, if I ever wore hats, I'd be wearing that one right now. It's not necessary. If you establish a garden with native plants and the proper nectar resources, you can have biological control in your garden that will manage your pests, or at least it's not going to get rid of them, but it's going to keep them below levels that cause you problems. So reduce pesticide use, or hopefully not use it at all, because there's scientific studies accumulating, and it's making it very clear that butterfly decline, insect decline is all being driven by multiple factors, but pesticide use is one of those factors. And again, you've heard me talk about this avidly in the past, I know. And at the time, I think I was one of the only people talking about the importance of pesticides. But since then, there's more data accumulating. The paper came out just recently with Xerxes authors on it, showing in urban areas in particular, pesticides are present in most plants in gardens. It's just there at low rates, but sublethal rates. And we know sublethal rates may not kill butterflies, but they will certainly stress populations and cause decline over time. And that's the message I've been preaching for some time now. And so this is something for the monarch, but it's also other things too, other insects generally. It's probably one of the main drivers of insect decline, in my opinion. Okay.
Before we move on, a couple
Sure.
of questions, points. Regina brought up that if you are spraying any chemicals, be sure not to use fabric gloves, use nitrile. But the best answer, I think, is try to avoid them altogether. And then there were a couple questions about the plants that you recommended that were providing late season nectar. A couple questions about whether butterflies actually use them, the yellow cleome in particular, and the telescoping mustard. Could you go back to that picture, David? And
Sure.
so,
Yes. Well, telescoping mustard is a plant that I found this year, and it was very popular with pollinators and skippers. humour skippers, which I'll be talking about later. Um, so, I- and I white butterflies I saw in it. So I no reason. I mean, it's a mustard, so most butterflies like mustards. Um, Cleome bee flower, I've seen monarchs on that. Um, Sunflowers, of course, and Plains coreopsis. I think I saw silver bordered fritillaries on that. Goldenrod, definitely. Yeah, so these examples here, I've seen butterflies on. And usually if you see one species, it means that most species would like them. You've got to remember at this time of year, there's not much else. So even if it's not their favored plant, they will use it simply because there's nothing else, perhaps. So,
Okay, thank you.
okay, so silver bordered fritillary. So this is a species that's isn't we used to think it was the same species that occurred in Europe, but it's actually been separated now. Um, so getting back to the iNaturalist map, there's only 20 records. So again, contemporary, just over the last few years, um, all in the sort of northeast corner. Um, Historically, it's been recorded in 10 counties, which extend a bit more than that northeast corner. Um, but we don't really have a lot of current information apart from a few sites. I suspect there are a lot more sites that host this butterfly that we are unaware of. And mostly in that circle I'm showing there. I'm particularly interested in the hot, dry areas. There, as you can see from the dots, there's some up in the more forested areas of northeast Washington, and undoubtedly there's more populations there than we know about. But I'm intrigued by the populations in eastern Washington, which is not a habitat you would expect this foresty type butterfly to exist in. But this is the type of habitat they occur in. Again, riparian areas, bogs and marshes, borders of lakes, the scablands, I guess. And I find myself being more attracted to scablands than ever before. I live in Yakima, which is a bit of a scabland, I guess, but not as scabby as some of the places that I go to. But they're fascinating because all riparian areas, you find a lot of insect life. And as you know, I'm an entomologist, not just a lepidopterist. So, the bees, the wasps, the flies, they just all accumulate in this area, in these areas. Um, so they're fascinating. But for the fritillary, they must be moist enough for the host plants to survive. And we mustn't forget about the importance of host plants. Without the host plant, they're not going to be there. So with the monarch, it's the milkweed. And for the fritillary, it's violets. And so in this picture here, which is a rocky ford or upper Crab Creek, you can see the green area in the center. That's basically the home territory of the silver bordered fritillary at this site. And it's small. I mean, I've got some maps to show. Um, and this is in contrast to habitat in Pend Oreille County, and I'm familiar with a few silver bordered populations up there. And actually, this photo is from Dave Nunnally. And so it's a very different type of habitat that they exist in up there from, further down the state in the hot, dry eastern Washington area. And I can't talk about silver bordered, oh, that's smiling, without talking about the Moxie Bog lesson, which actually should be in university textbooks, probably in insect conservation or something. So this is Moxie Bog, a picture of Moxie Bog, which is Moxie's just a suburb, if you like, of Yakima. So it's on my doorstep, and I guess that's why I've been fascinated by it for a number of times. So the story started in 1966. This is probably an original sign from 1966 too. They're owned by the Nature Conservancy. They purchased the land at that time because lepidopterists had said, "Oh, there's a fantastic population of silver-bordered fritillaries here on this land." I don't know if they meant just the 10 acres that the Nature Conservancy bought, or they meant a wider area. Probably the latter. I think now, after knowing a lot more about the situation. By the way, Paulette knows just as much as I do about this story. She's been heavily involved as well, and is my liaison with the Nature Conservancy. So the history, a brief history, In 1966, they acquired the 10 acres of fenland. I really wouldn't call it fenland, but that's what somebody called it, to protect the silver border fritillary. At the time, there's only 15 other Washington sites known to host the butterfly, and it was the first reserve created anywhere in the US to protect an invertebrate species, we think. Um, Bob Pyle told me that, but I think it's true. But the thing was, little was known in '66 about the habitat requirements of SPF. I mean, 1966 was the time when people just collected butterflies and probably didn't know much about the biology and ecology of them. So there was no management of the site. They put up a fence, basically, and the sign which you saw. Um, and over time, reeds, bushes, and small trees encroached upon the site, as natural succession occurred. But it took a while because in 1970, well, it's only 4 years, Bob saw hundreds there, he said. And then there was a survey 14 years later by Merrill Peterson, and he reported a population of 1,000. So that's pretty good. So they did pretty well for quite a lengthy period of time. I don't know if there was any management of the site at that time. I'm assuming there wasn't, but it didn't grow as fast as you might imagine. But then I arrived on the scene with interest in 2007 because I moved to Yakima from the Tri-Cities, and started looking at this place, this mythical place, and could find no evidence of silver-bordered fritillary on my visits in '07, '08, and '09. And then I conducted an official survey with some Xerces funding, I think. They gave me some money. And we found in 2011, did a fairly exhaustive survey of these 10 acres, and there was no silver bordered fritillaries there. So it had gone. We did find some violets, but no sign of fritillary. And then it wasn't surprising because this is what it looked like. All these bushes and trees. And the violets we did find were struggling to survive under all the reeds and the bushes and everything else. So it was, and the land around the fence was now being grazed, which is probably a good thing, but they were probably using herbicides and insecticides as well. And there was no evidence of violets on this grazed land like there probably was back in 1966. And I think the butterfly wasn't just in the 10 acres, it was probably over all the grazed land. I mean, so in actual fact, this reserve should have been grazed. The cows should have been let in every now and again. If we'd known at that time that was the thing to do. So this is this year. This is what's happening right now. So, the Nature Conservancy still own the land, and they're finally grazing it, which is really good. The goats are going to have quite a job ahead of them. But there's a possibility there now that we could actually have the land grazed. Maybe there's some violets still there. Maybe we can introduce some violets, and maybe one day we can introduce silver bordered fritillaries there and have Moxie Bog as a place again with the butterfly. So anyway, that's the story in a nutshell of Moxie Bog, and it's the lesson to be learned is that you need management. You can't just walk away from habitats for butterflies. They need to be managed, otherwise they'll be overgrown in certain circumstances. I mean, every habitat's different, of course, but the story is, or the lesson is, you shouldn't just put a fence up and walk away. Okay, off my soapbox, back to Upper Crab Creek.
So before you move on, David, I just wanted to give a shout out to Herman Flamenco, the new TNC steward, who was the one who had the idea and organized and raised the money to put the goats on Moxie Bog there. So great hopes of a fabulous partnership with Herman in the future.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. Okay, so
May I just ask if anyone is monitoring the response of the violets to the goats?
we don't even, I mean, I don't even know if there's any violets there. Paulette told me there wasn't any, right,
No.
Paulette?
No, the violets, the last violet patch that, and we can discuss this more, but the last violet patch that we found was further to the north and the west of where the goats were being tethered. And we met with Herman recently, and he talked about the reasons for how and why they chose where to put the goats. And so he's aware. So he's going to meet with David, and so he's aware of the history and where the violets have been seen most recently. So we'll continue to work with him and see what we might be able to do in the future.
Okay, so when we in the early years of well, it wasn't early years. It was sometime we were still looking at Moxie Bog, and then Bowman. I don't know if he's online tonight, but and I can't. I struggled to find the date of when he discovered this site, Silver Bordered Fertility site at Upper Crab Creek, Rocky Ford. I think it was 2017, but could have been a year earlier. But it struck me as being a site that we could learn a lot from in terms of the Moxie Bog site and how that should be perhaps. I don't know if I still have the same feelings anymore because it is quite a different spot. But anyway, it's another dry area site. I mean, the environment is dry, hot and dry, but it has this riparian zone in it that is fed by aquifers, we believe. So it's a very unique area. It's sort of elevated too. In the background of the picture there, you can see some trees, and there's a creek down there, but it's down the hill. So this is elevated. So John discovered the population there in about 2017, and we've on and off been monitoring it ever since. As you can see there, that the dates, the yellow dates and numbers, the numbers represent the number of individuals of butterflies we saw. And you can see it's the first 2 weeks of June that seems to be the flight period there, or the main flight period. And you can see it's been fairly consistent, 15 to 30 individuals sighted in the area. But I realize now, after this year when I did more work there, we're only looking at part of the site. So it was what I'm calling the home part of the site, 15 to 20 individuals. And we only ever went, May, June time. But this year, realizing that they had 2 generations, and so this is a wobber trip. We did, and I'll be thanking the wobber people at the end. But we had a couple of field trips there, and we also went in August too. And we found 41 individuals there. So it's actually a bigger population, but we had a few people, and we explored the area a bit more. But maybe it's a stable population, not really great data to infer anything from, but at least we can document its presence there for that period of time, and who knows how long it's been there. So this is a Google Earth picture of the actual site. And if the people who's been there, we park down in the car park there and just wander across. Actually, we usually go down the creek first. And so this is the upper area where the butterflies occur. So you can see these wet areas indicated by slightly greenish things, and scabland type things, little ponds. And this is where the butterfly occurs. So this is the homeland or the home area where we first sighted the butterflies. And for years, we didn't go beyond that. This year we went further, and where the pins are other either individuals or small populations. I think most of them represent small populations. It's private land up there we discovered, which is unfortunate because there's more wet areas. I think this is private too over here. We've searched all down the creek. There's nothing down the creek. Haven't searched up here, so we need to do that. But this seems to be the site. So it's maybe there's small little populations that interact with each other. It's like a meta population, perhaps, which makes more sense than just a single population over here. But it needs more study and needs and strategies at this very early stage. I think with all these butterflies, we need to locate new populations and sites. And I think with silver bordered, there's more of them around. We just don't know where they are. There's certainly suitable habitat in the form of riparian and marshy areas. Looking at Google Earth, it seems like they're everywhere. But one of the things is, and why I guess I'm different from other people, it's not a preferred habitat of Lepidopterus in the summer. And I must admit that's been my story for a long time. Why would I want to go there instead of the mountains during July and August? So I think there's a lot of potential to find other places where these butterflies occur. And this map is a bit messy, but the red asterisks are the places we know in this scabland area where they occur, this Beaver Butte that Melanie knows a lot about, which is private land, but we can visit there if we ask nicely. There's Rocky Ford, and there's also some populations closer to Spokane that John Bowman's familiar with. But all these other places were marked by the pins of my ideas for looking at potential other sites at the right time, because you've got to go to at the right time, which is the time that people don't want to go. And this is just, a first look. There's plenty of other places too. You can see little lakes and ponds all over the place. So, I think there's plenty of potential to find other sites, but it's a lot of work to find or to do the exploration. We need an army of people to do it really, and I'm only one person. But if we can have more WABA involvement, we can get through quite a few new places. So systematically visiting habitats for evidence of violets. I mean, that can be just as important. We can go earlier in the season looking for violets to at least, determine which sites have the best chance of having butterflies there, since violets are a prerequisite for the butterflies. And then the second thing is we need to identify the habitat the things about a habitat that support silver-bordered fritillary populations. And of course, as I've said, the violets are important. And I'm embarrassed to say that we still don't, I haven't bothered, because I haven't been serious about this until this year, finding out what the species of violet is at Rocky Ford and other places. I'm assuming it's northern bog violet, which was Nephrophila, which was the species at Moxie Bog, but we do not know for sure. And iNaturalist isn't much help with that. And I don't think it's actually confirmed the herbarium records or anything from Eastern Washington scabland. So we need to look more at the violets and what are the constraints to survival of violets in the scablands. Obviously, hot, dry conditions, and it needs the moisture. But how hot can they take it? And I have seen the violets at Rocky Ford. This is Rocky Ford again, but just in passing. I'm usually too interested and distracted by the butterflies to seriously look. So one of the first things I'll do next year is to go up early spring or in the spring sometime and look for the violets to see just how extensive they are, not just in this home area on this slide, but throughout the area, and to identify the species. And I'm a little bit concerned that the vegetation is actually growing a bit too dense and may be limiting violet development and survival. I mean, there's no sign of, any Moxie bog succession happening anytime soon there. There's some bushes and trees on the side there, but there's nothing growing actually in the habitat to worry about, except maybe for this, which is sweet white clover. It seems to have recently invaded. There's a lot of deer in the place, and I wonder why they haven't been feeding on this to keep it down. But this is pictures actually taken in the actual area where the silver borders are flying, and presumably there's violets underneath all this sweet white clover. It's a great nectar source. The butterflies love it, but it might be causing a problem. So this is something else we need to look at. And just like the monarch, of course, the nectar sources are important. And at this site, they're pretty good. There are a good mixture of native and non-native nectar sources. This is a pretty striking thistle that I was excited to find. It's actually called the Palouse thistle. So it's a local endemic thistle. It's a white thistle. The fritillarists love it and pollinators love it. And that's common there, very common, where the fritillaries are. And there's other native plants like the yampa on the left top, goldenrods, which the butterflies were used in all of these species. The only non-native was the Canada thistle, which my starting slide was of. And they love that too. But most butterflies do, as I said at the beginning. I was reminiscing about finding my first tortoiseshells on that thistle species back in England in 19 something or other. So the third thing that threatens this place and probably other Eastern Washington populations that are fed by aquifers is the dropping of the aquifer. And John reported this in our report to BLM, who own this land, or to Fish and Wildlife back in 2017, I think, or 2018. It seems to be dropping by 10 feet per year, presumably, caused by local agriculture. So that's clearly, if that's true, that's not going to work out well for the butterfly in the end. To me, from year to year, it hasn't really seemed to be any different, but the changes could be subtle, of course. But it's something to be aware of, and of course, that would spell the end for the violets and the end for the butterflies. So I'm not sure there's too much we can do about it except, minimize water use. Okay, so I don't know if you want to ask any questions on that species or just move straight on to the juniper hairstreak.
There are a couple of questions, but let's save them till the end and move on to the juniper hairstreak since we're getting short on time.
Okay, yes. So juniper hairstreak is another, these species are favorite species of mine. I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but juniper hairstreak's always been a favorite of mine, probably since I reared it for the Life Histories book, and this was one of the butterflies I reared for that book. Does have an identity crisis. When Dave and I wrote the book, it was Crineus near Calcasiva. Before that, it was Barryi, and now it's Nelsoni. So it's neither here nor there, really, except it's the Columbia Basin segregate. So it doesn't even have its own moniker, its own name yet, subspecies or whatever. Yeah. So, fortunately for us, Xerces did some work in 2023. They did a pretty comprehensive study at some sites in this area of Klickitat County, and they found they surveyed 8 sites and found it present at 4 of the sites, which are indicated by the asterisks there. And I think, I can't remember now, at least 2 of them, 3 of them maybe are new. I think 1 might have been known before. So that's great because we are, scratching to try and find sites now today where this butterfly still occurs. There's no iNaturalist data at the moment. John says there's 7 counties where it's being recorded in. Well, I've seen that data, and there are 7 counties. So we need to do more locating of populations. And to do that, we need to find the junipers. And so this is from the Burke Museum Herbarium, and you can see the locations of junipers. Franklin County is another place that we've known about the butterflies before, juniper dunes, I'll talk about in a minute. But you can see there's some other potential places. Asotin County is another place, and Walla Walla County. There's also Rocky Mountain juniper that the butterfly will utilize too, which goes further north. Probably not, the butterfly is not going to be going further north, but it's an alternative, and these maps are not, as I'm discovering it, they're not be all and end all of everything. Okay, so Juniper Dunes is the place that I knew juniper hairstreak from, historic habitat, unique place, as you can see there. But the last confirmed sightings were the ones I made, as far as I know, April 26th and May the 6th in 2008, when I was working on the book. And absent in visits 2017, we had a wobber species credit conservation need trip at that time. Didn't find it. 2023, I went on my own, didn't find it. And this year we had a wobber trip, we didn't find it. And there's shot from the wobber trip where we're looking at the junipers. And this was the spot where we found it, not in abundance, but it did occur quite readily. You could go to some of these trees that are in the picture here and find the butterfly around the trees quite readily. So we're in the right place, but we did not find anything. But then I had a close look at Google Earth, and so the top ellipse is where we were and where historically we found the butterfly. And then further over by about, I don't know, half a mile, is a whole heap more juniper, as you can see. Maybe in those days the Google Earth wasn't so good, so you couldn't really see the junipers. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So that needs surveying. We need to do that. So we've already got one trip I think we can put on our WABA field trip calendar for surveying this far flung juniper stand. With more than a stand, it's like a forest from the looks of it. And maybe the butterfly has its stronghold there, and when its populations are high, it will drift out over here. That's my hope anyway, that it's still here, and we will find out next year. So that's one positive thing we can do. And that's looking towards the area where there's more juniper. So you can see from the earlier slide with just a few junipers, you can see it's quite different. So wish us luck for that. So the needs and strategies, basically, we need to locate new populations. I mean, once we find populations, we can do some biological and ecological work to look at what they need and what they do. But until we find more populations, I mean, the Bickleton area, this is a shot I took at Bickleton looking for some of these places that the Xerces people found. I couldn't find any new populations. I didn't find any of their populations, but it's certainly good habitat, as you can see there, with junipers, pretty wild land. There's probably other populations there too. Some of it, unfortunately, had been burnt since Xerxes looked at the site. So I will check all juniper sites, as many as we can, in central and southeast Washington. This is unusual. This was I can't remember if it's Rocky Mountain juniper or the Western juniper, but this is at Gloyd Seeps. This is one of the monarch sites. There's a little plantation of juniper there, way out of range of all the junipers that are on the the distribution map. So I doubt there's juniper hair streak there, but it's certainly worth checking next year at the right time. So yeah, once we find populations, we can do the ecological studies, nectar sources. I mean, juniper dunes does have pretty good nectar sources at that time when they're flying, the phenology and the threats. It's hard to believe why they would understand why they would disappear from juniper dunes, because it's a fairly remote habitat, not threatened by much at all. It means no spraying nearby. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery, and I'll hang on to the idea that they're still there. Okay, moving fast along. You'll be glad that I'm not talking about the 21 species. So the Yuma skipper, and this has become one of my favorite species now because it's so, I don't know, charismatic. Who would have thought the butterfly that could be charismatic? It's also confusing too. But it is the most restricted Washington butterfly. I guess I have a thing about restricted butterflies. As you know, I work on Leona's little blue too. So there's a lot, these butterflies have a lot in common in being restricted to certain habitats. And Sun Lake State Park is the restricted habitat in Washington, as you can see from the orange box right at the top. So this is the Yuma worldwide distribution, i.e. the rest of the Western US, from iNaturalist, all records. So, it's not, it's not unlike Leona's little blue, where it's only in the one habitat and nowhere else. It does occur in other places too. It's just in Washington, we have it in the one spot. So this is the Washington iNaturalist map, and it's just at Sun Lakes. There's 17 records, and I've contributed, like most of them, and 3 counties, because Bob saw some individuals in Klickitat County quite a long time ago now, and also Asotin County. So there's potential populations in those counties that haven't been seen since. One of my workers with me, sorry, I've forgotten his name, but he came out with me to look for Yuma in July, and he was so invested that I told him about the Klickitat sightings, and he went down there and spent days searching for Yuma down there, since he'd just seen it at Sun Lakes, but he didn't find it. But not to say that it isn't there. We need to search these other locations just in case there is a hidden population somewhere. And besides those sites, I think I saw Yuma at Tucana as well. Okay, but Sun Lake State Park is the place. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Sun Lake State Park, but it's a unique place, as most of these places are. And this is this is where the butterfly occurs. I'll show you a nice picture in a minute. There you go. So this is what it looks like, and this is, has a great geological history. Dry Falls Lake, where the slow Missoula floods came and carved out the scablands. So it's steeped in history, and this is what remains with these little lakes, and this is where Yuma lives. Perch Lake, Vic Myers Lake, and Meadow Lake are the three sites that we found the butterfly this year in abundance. Not at Dry Falls Lake, which is the one at the top, or Deep Lake over here, which used to be good sites, according to John Pelham, probably Bob. So Perch Lake is my Yuma hotspot. It's where I first saw it, and it just occurs around the edge of the lake. Quite remarkable, and it's because of its host plant, which is giant reed Phragmites. And so this is where things get a little bit confusing. I'm still confused. We have the native subspecies, Phragmites australis americanus, and an introduced subspecies, Australis australis. Some people think they're different species, but whatever. They're different entities, but they're very difficult to separate. But I think I've found the way of doing it now, and there's a lot of information online on iNaturalist too. Typically, the native subspecies has deciduous leaf sheaths that come apart very readily at this time of year and in the winter that reveal reddish stems. So, in theory, I'm accumulating some winter field work, and spring field work. I'll be going out looking for Phragmites that have got reddish stems in the winter and populating iNaturalist with reported sightings probably. And so, if it's as clear as that, then even I can do that. It should be easy. Maybe Bob's going to tell me it's not that easy, but so anyway. But so the other thing is, we've thought, or some of us have thought, that only non-native Phragmites will serve as a host plant for Yuma skippers. I know for sure that they will oviposit on non-native Phragmites because this is a picture of that happening. And I assume it was non-native because I got it locally in Yakima. But again, I guess it might not be, but I think it probably is. We don't really know if larvae will feed on non-native Phragmites. They might or they might not. Dave Nunnally and I didn't do that experiment. This is one of Dave's pictures of a larva on Phragmites from Sun Lakes, and he was convinced at the time that it was native Phragmites because he did his due diligence as he does, and concluded that it was native. But a lot of things have happened at Sun Lake since that time, of course, which I'll talk about in a minute. I also found that Yuma larvae could be reared on this grass in captivity, which is Chinese silvergrass, miscanthus, which is, I think, is either the same or related to the grass that Bob found Yuma skipper nearby in Klickitat County, which is, that's right, Bob. I can't remember the famous house that it's at, but there's some place that you found it. Anyway, so the distribution of Phragmites on the herbarium website is not very, there's not much there. There's just those data points. And it doesn't really help us much for Sun Lake State Park. And iNaturalist is no help either. Seems like, botanists don't really spend much time looking at Phragmites. However, Australis, the common one, does have a few data points, including, I think, one at Sun Lake State Park. But, a lot of these sightings may be suspect because they're not, some are looking at the sheaths and the color of the stems, but most are not. So we need to do a lot of work in that area to actually work out what's going on. The herbarium's got more sightings or more records of Australis, the non-native as well. But the identity at the moment at Sun Lakes, in my mind, is still in question. And it's possible that both subspecies are present. Some years ago, we had a herbiciding incident there, which I'll talk about in a minute, I think. So the composition of the Phragmites may have changed in the meantime since Dave looked at what he looked at, presumably around Perch Lake, because he told me about Perch Lake. So the populations at Sun Lake State Park were discovered by John Pelham on July 22nd, 1984. And he wrote a great paper that I only finally found, or he gave it to me actually this year. Really excellent. Actually, it was his response to somebody criticizing him that was a much better read, I found, in typical John Pelham style. If anyone wants it, I can probably send it to you. So moving on, from that time when he found it, everything went smoothly, I think, as far as we know. Again, there's no records. But in August 2012, I went there in June looking for monarchs and found these signs about spraying, and Phragmites was included in their spraying. That set off the alarm bells, and there's an example of what I was finding. So I immediately contacted Bob and Ann Potter at Fish and Wildlife, and yeah, there was a lot of communication, and we got it stopped pretty rapidly because I don't think they'd finished, but they'd already done a lot. This picture was taken 2 years later, and I estimated 85% reduction in Phragmites around the lakes from what I was familiar with prior. So that was not very good. But the good news was that same year I found evidence of Yuma skippers still alive, 10 seen in 2 hours. So they weren't extirpated, they were still there. And then later in the month, so I went twice, found a similar number in 3 hours. So that was the good news. They hadn't got rid of them. And then a few years later in 2017, we had another wobber S species of the greatest conservation need visit trip, and we found 24 in 3 hours. And this slide, or this picture, I keep saying slide, I think I'm back in the old days. This picture shows Phragmites recovered in an area where it was sprayed. So, spraying is pretty foolish anyway. It's not permanent anyway. So yeah, they were still there. And then since then I've made sporadic visits again. It's one of these hot, dry habitats that nobody really wants to go to. I can't say it's a fantastic place to go in the middle of July because it's always going to be nearly 100 degrees. You need to go early and leave by lunchtime. So, in July 10th this year, 14 skippers in 4 hours. And then I went back with 3 wobber people, very thankful for those guys. And we counted 95 Yuma skippers in 3 hours, which is the greatest number I've seen in that time. And we traveled together, so there's no double counting going on. And it was those 3 lakes that I mentioned earlier that we found them around. So I think it's a healthy population still. And the more females than males. And so we took some basic biological observations. 86% of the observations were of them nectaring. And noxious weeds, unfortunately, to some people, are important nectar sources for Yuma at some lakes. Unlike Rocky Ford, where there's some native plants too, not so much at there aren't any at some lakes. 74% of the nectaring occurred on introduced knapweeds, which actually knapweed was really healthy looking as well. I used to hate this plant in my garden. I used to spend weekends getting rid of every piece. I've got a whole new respect for it now because it's not just Yuma, it's a whole range of butterflies, particularly late season butterflies that depend upon it. Or they're utilizing it. I don't know about depend, but they're certainly doing well on it. And Yuma is no exception. In fact, it seems to prefer knapweeds, 74%, compared to the thistle, the Canada creeping thistle plant. It didn't like that as much, if these observations are representative, compared to the knapweed. So this is the telescoping mustard, as I mentioned earlier, and it's the only native plant that was in bloom there during July. And it was used by Yuma, but far less than knapweed, just 1 or 2 individuals we found on the telescoping mustard. So this is the small triangle of Yuma occurrence, abundant in that occurrence. Again, harkens back to Leona's little blue, where it's 15 square miles, so much bigger, but really abundant butterfly in that small area. Yuma is a much smaller area. It's like 1.5 by 1 mile. And it's abundant around those three lakes. The big crosses say that we didn't find it around those lakes. There may be small populations there, of course, because we were only there one day, but it's certainly not like the other three places. So searching for additional habitats, that is the thing we need to do. Again, Sun Lake State Park is, the habitat there is not a unique place. There are other, little ponds scattered all around the area. The more I look at Google Earth, the more I find. So the red is the current Yuma site. The big areas I'm circling potential habitats that I can see exist. And we need to find, well, it wants to find if it's native or non-native Phragmites that will help, cut down the sites a bit. But we need to search these places. The stars, there's 2 stars there. I have searched those. Great sites, plenty of nectar, plenty of Phragmites, but no sign of Yuma. But there's a lot more work to do. The pins, individual sites where be worth looking at. Actually, the star in the middle there is a new site that I'll tell you about in a minute. But this is one of the alternative sites, the Billy Clap Dam, south of Sun Lake State Park. It looks great. You'd think Yuma would be there, but it wasn't. So this is back to Sun Lake State Park again, and the Yuma population's the arrow heading towards Perch Lake and Dry Force Lake that used to be good habitat. There's not much area around there. And there's a lake over the back there we haven't looked at either. Need to look at that. But currently it's not around here. But then you look up the slope, up the cliff, and you can see Cooley City up there. And I thought, is there anything up there? So looking back at Google Earth, so there's Perch Lake, and there's the road going up, and you come to, if you're familiar with this area, you come to Highway 2 that goes to Cooley City. And right at the top there, right next to the road, these little lakes. You drive along this road and you can see them. It looks, hey, nearly drove into somebody looking at the lakes, but you can see them there looking like perfect habitat. So I got out, and there's a little parking spot around over there. And to my amazement, it was a Fish and Wildlife property. Fish and Wildlife, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife owns this land. You wouldn't really know it because the sign was on the ground, and some of the other sites were all bent, and there's lots of cartridges around, and it's an abused place. But I went there and searched, spent a day searching, and I found Yuma skippers. So this is nearly 3 miles distant. So if we'd known this back in 2012, Bob, we wouldn't have panicked quite so much because there was this site up on the ridge, on the, whatever you want to call it, on the escarpment, where perhaps they'd blown up. I mean, the prevailing winds might come that way, but whatever, they're there and they're quite happy. I didn't work all this out until late in the season, July the 28th. So the season for them was winding down. They're usually gone by early August. But I did find 5 in 2 lakes. Junction Lake at the top and Lena Lake in the middle, I think it's called. And there's evidence on the far right that they're probably there as well. So that was exciting. It's not like a huge range extension or anything, but it helps the security of the population. And it sort of encourages me more that there could be other sites like this further. I did go up to Grand Coulee, and there's not too many sites I could see up there. I did check a couple of places, but more to the west, there are more little lakes on the land on the other side of this lake, whose name I've forgotten at the moment. So there's potential. And there's a picture of the site. So, very sad looking Fish and Wildlife. Well, that sign's actually pretty good. The other one's knocked down. But you can see, the green in the distance there, potential habitat. And there's a close look at the Junction Lake habitat. And again, you've got the noxious weeds, you've got the thistles there, and there was knapweed too. The knapweed's over the other side over there. This is where I found 1 or 2. And the Lena Lake habitat is the same. So I will go back there early in the season. I wouldn't be surprised if I find quite large populations. And this other insect had no respect for SGCN, of course, and mortality was happening to a poor Yuma skipper that presumably had lived out its reproductive outcome, hopefully. So the needs and conservation strategies, again, continued exploration for new habitats and populations, including those counties where it might occur, which will give us even greater buffering. The summer blooming native, so I've got native down twice, native plant restoration would be a good idea if we're aghast at non-native plants, but right now they're doing okay with the non-natives. And then, we need more further studies on the host use, in particular, the Phragmites situation, and adult ecology. Dave and I did a lot of life history stuff, of course, but adult ecology we don't know much about. And spending the whole month out at Sun Lake State Park doesn't sound great to me, but maybe it should be done. Okay, so those are the species that I really concentrated on this summer. I wanted to look more at the meadow fritillary, but the opportunities didn't arise. This species is probably in more trouble than we think. This is all records on iNaturalist again, and so it's more of a Canadian species, more forested area species, more cooler forested than we have perhaps. Only one record currently on iNaturalist. Again, it's only contemporary, but it's supposed to be on 7 counties. And recent records, that 2013 is the most recent record, or the only record on iNaturalist. The one at the top is actually just over the border in Canada. But the historical records, there's only 15 historical records. I mean, I got hold of the historical records, so there's not many of them either in those counties. So I think it's a species that we definitely need to pay more attention to. I remember it personally from Moses Meadows, and I did go to Moses Meadows this year and did not find it. And the only record we have, the most recent sighting, is by Cheryl. Don't know if she's online, but Cheryl Bellin sighted it at Ferry Lake in May 30th this year, and she got a great picture of the 3 of them. So there must be a small population at that site. So that's on my hot list of places to go to next season, and maybe there's more around that area, which isn't, as you can see, too far from Moses Meadows, where the historically pretty good populations were. So maybe in this area deserves further searching. We don't really have a lepidopterist living in this area, do we? So we don't get many lepidopterists searching this area because it's so far away. And that applies to me too. So maybe it's not as dire as the records would suggest, but we certainly need to prioritize it, I think, and I certainly will try to do that next year. So the needs and conservation strategies is just more information on populations and distribution. So to finish off a bit, there's other species that are on the list, and I know the list is being revised at the moment, I think. But the ones that are currently on Golden Hair Street, that's pretty restricted to just one county, and just and there's not many records on iNaturalist, again, mostly by Keith Brady, actually. So there's not too many records. So that probably deserves more attention. Johnson's Hair Street too, I keep hearing stories about declining populations of that. And I know recent fire in the Olympics, the habitat was affected of that. So this is another one that probably deserves more attention. But it's on the west side, so it's harder for me. Marden skipper, where is it? One of these species where it occurs on the east side, anyway, on my side in the mountains. I've found 2 new populations this year without even trying, just scouting for the conference. So I suspect it's fairly secure in a small area around Rimrock, and maybe we need to look a bit further afield, see how far it spreads. And I don't know much about its status on the west side, but it's maybe not as dire as, say, the meadow fritillary. And the Sonora skipper is the same. We tend to there's more data on iNaturalist, as you can see, and we come across it, or people come across it quite frequently. So maybe this isn't quite as dire. 20 counties it's supposed to occur in. So maybe it's another one that's not to the top of the list. And the same with hoary elfin, quite common around Spokane, and places on the west side as well. I don't see it very much around Yakima, as you can see, but it may be not as dire as some of the species. And this one, Purpureous dusky wing, which I'm a bit perplexed that it's even on the list, because it occurs in many places, and where it occurs, it's pretty abundant. And maybe it's on the list because of its status on the west side, which is more precarious. But certainly on the east side, or the middle, it doesn't seem to be too bad. Then there's Gold Hunter's Hair Streak that's not on the list, that presumably will get on the list at some point, because it's just one small population, maybe, or a couple of populations in one county. I was fortunate enough to find a couple of individuals this year. So this is one that we need to look at a bit more in the future. So my conclusions is just very general conclusions. As I said at the beginning, this is just a stab at doing more with these species of greatest conservation need to get some preliminary data. But it's obvious that we need more effort to locate new populations for some of these species. And I know that was the focus back in 2017 when we had a similar plan with WABA and Fish and Wildlife, was to do that. But we definitely need to do that consistently, not just 1 year. And for as long as I'm around, I'm happy to lead groups to do that. And the more people involved, the better. And then once we find these populations, we need to do some ecological studies, which I'm also interested and keen to do, to assess the vulnerabilities and just how secure they are. Host plant studies just fall into that category too, but with particular significance, of course, to some like the Phragmites and Yuma skipper. And we need to monitor the populations over time. It doesn't have to be every year, but every few years, just to keep track of what's going on. And so with WABA, we could do it as a 5-year thing, perhaps, to check, or less than that, 4 years maybe. The availability of summer nectar sources may be a limiting factor for the monarch. We know that. I'm pretty sure that that's true. And also some of the other species, like maybe silver-bordered and Numa in some populations. The current ones that I've talked about tonight, not so much. But it may be summer nectar may be a limiting factor for a whole range of butterflies, not just the species of greatest conservation need. And the dependence on non-native nectar is something that we really need to talk more about and get into the whole thinking of these things. It's definitely playing more of a beneficial role than people have ever realized in the past. Climate buffering via shade trees is important, but for butterflies generally, monarchs and other species in the hot, dry, arid zone. And again, we'll get arguments about Russian olive being not desirable, but if it's providing shade, it's a good thing. So anyway, there's my controversial statement. So a lot more work is needed, of course, which I always figured was going to be the case. But citizen scientists like everyone with WABA can play a huge role in keeping tabs on these species of greatest conservation need. I think everybody that came along to our few field trips this year gained something from it, and it's always exciting to do a trip with a mission in mind, to find something. It sort of adds spice to the whole thing. And what we've achieved already in 2017 and 25 has advanced our knowledge of some of these species. So, a little bit goes a long way. An iNaturalist, I can't not pass the moment of not advocating for it. I mean, it is an invaluable tool for monitoring these species, but all species really. And as time goes on, it'll become even more valuable. And I just want to thank you, everybody that came along to any of our trips this year and in 2017, who has helped collect the data. You're doing a great job, and thank you for helping. And I hope you help in the future too. And then, have I got time, Melanie, to talk about the book? Not Melanie, Paulette.
Just a couple of minutes, because we're at an hour and a half at this point. We still want to have a little discussion.
Okay, well, I don't need to talk about the book, except I wrote the introduction for this book, so I mean you can find out about it yourself. It's about butterflies through culture and history. It's a visual thing. So there's all these pictures. So I'll go through them quickly. Things like Alice Mix, the blue caterpillar smoking a hookah, and a lot of historical, the famous women that were good in the progress in the science of butterflies and entomology generally are mentioned in the book, which is good. Historical things from long ago, but also contemporary things like Andy Warhol's painting of a silver spot, which I had no idea about, and the Silence of the Lambs, of course, we all know about, and Nabokov, and a whole range of things. It's very interesting. It's put in a style like this where the images match each other. I had no idea that butterflies had a link to warfare. Anyway, and yeah, so I was privileged enough to be asked to write the introduction to it, and I called it The Magic of Butterflies. I'm not suggesting for a minute you go and buy it for my introduction, but it's there. Thank you for that. Thank you all for listening to it.
Thank you so much, David. A very, very interesting survey of some of the imperiled butterflies. And so this is our time for discussion. You're welcome to unmute, ask questions directly, check out anytime. This is completely free and open. John, I see you waving your hand. So,
Well, I got 2 or 5 things. First off, Jim Reed they discovered Oclotes Yuma the year before I did. You get the record straight. He got it, and I don't feel too bad about that. Number two, the silver-spotted fritillary was first recorded in the Yakima area with no real data in 1882 by the Northern Transcontinental Survey, and that was documented by John Shepard. All right.
Is there a location for that?
No, it's like they were doing a rail survey, and so they had Yakima City. That's all they said. Yeah, well, it's 1882. It wasn't much of a city either,
No.
So the other thing is that we need to recognize that the Columbia Basin, you talked about the scablands. They didn't get to be scablands by accident. That was floods, and that's water. Water and the silver-bordered fritillary obviously go together. So that it does explain why we have these basically bog butterflies out in the desert, right? That's an interesting thing. And the last thing, well, no, the Bellona. The Bellona is an incredibly local butterfly. In Moses Meadows, if you're not actually standing where it is, you won't see it. I mean, seriously, you can be 20 feet away, you won't see it at all. And the only reason that we found it is Kyoshi and I parked next to the draw that it was in, and as we got out of the car, it was there flying, and that's the only place we found them that day. That was it. So they're very local. You do need to do more to find them, and like keeping that in mind that they are that local. And last, the only place in the whole universe where Oclotes Yuma and Beloria marina, Yuma skipper, and the silver-bordered fritillary co-occur, in near Sympatry, is Dry Falls area, Sun Lake State Park.
Okay, when was the last time silver-bordered was seen there?
2015.
Okay, see that again. I go there to see Yuma, so I don't go there in June.
Yeah, they're in slightly different places, right?
Okay.
Yeah, if you went along Meadow Creek, I think you probably have a better chance.
I was wondering about that, and that was on my list of things to do next year.
There you go.
Thank you, John.
just chime in. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was thinking, thank you, Paulette, and thank you, David, for a really arresting talk. I'm just so excited to see all this stuff going on, and you're doing so much of it yourself, not to mention all the monarch work. So, more power, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very,
I enjoy doing it, as you know. So
yeah, I know you do. We never cease to be impressed by what you do, but this is even more so. 2 quick things. Just what John said, all those things. Yeah, Dave McCorkle was the modern exponent of Moxie Bog in the 50s and 60s, back when he was at UW. But yeah, that transporter, not the transporter, but the expedition find was a fascinating thing. And looking at your pictures, and that was genius, by the way, finding those little lakes below the dam up there. It occurred to me at the time looking at those of yours that you're going to find a place where there's Marina and Yuma together. I bet you will. And that
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah. But I have two things. One is a little comment on those two weird southern occurrences in Washington. Now, that's not super surprising because, of course, there have been records in northern Oregon, not recently confirmed. So, with a relictual species like that, and this is clearly post-Pleistocene relictual classic occurrence, like a pool of water drying up, leaving little spots. Um, so they're in northern Oregon. Why not in southern Washington? But the two places, and I just happened to have been in the right place in the right time with Tia on one to have found them. And the one at Maryhill Gardens, which used to be, as I said in the chat, such a good butterfly stopover, but they got rid of their buddleia and other things, and now it's a place for butterflies. But it was a terrific monarch stopover place before they crossed the river. Anyway, on one of those trips looking at monarchs, Tia spotted it first, as always, and there was this big honking Hesperion skipper on the miscanthus grass that was grown there ornamentally. Now we found it on 2 or 3 visits. Finally, didn't want to collect it, such a small population. Finally, did collect a spent male, so we do have a voucher specimen, and we have lots of pictures. No question it was Yuma. But that population occurred for a couple of years, and then it was gone. Now, how did it get there to this ornamental anthropogenic site? Well, there are 2 different hypotheses that I can think of. One is that it came in on, the non-native reeds, which are here and there at wet spots. That's nowhere near the canals, like the waterway through the potholes that probably takes it for miles. But there are some non-native patches, presumably not too far away, within 3 or 4 miles. But to the west of there in Klickitat, there's at least one decent little reed bed that Fish and Wildlife and Washington DOW and DOSW and TNC and Xerxes are all aware of. Have all looked at. I have too. Never found Yuma there, but that is, we think, the native population. So it could either be an actual local or nearby relictual native population that we have not found, or it could be incoming on the European reed. That's the Klickitat, that hasn't been found for a long time. Might be extinct. But then the other one's a little more interesting, really, down at Asotin. And when you go down from Asotin down to Heller's Bar, down to the place where we're someday going to find hackberry butterflies, and where I did find the dainty sulfur back in '75, which I saw one of yesterday in Denver after my 60th high school reunion. There are actual patches of reeds at the bottom of these seep waterfalls. They're not really waterfalls, they're seeps that come down the cliffs from the agricultural uplands above the Snake River. And those seeps are where you find most of the butterflies around there, except along the river itself, mostly on non-native plants. But there are some patches of reed. And it's not only I who found one big female with David Branch down on the riverbank on the yellow composites in October of 19 something or early 2000 something, but also Jim Dillman, who did a great deal of butterfly survey in Asotin County and nearby counties for the Nez Perce tribe and for others. Jim found it there too on 2 or 3 occasions. So there are several different finds of the Yuma skipper there in Asotin. And I suspect that somewhere there's a colony if we could only find a big reed bed. So that's that.
It's on the other side of Hell's Canyon in Oregon too.
Well, exactly. Right on. Thanks, John. And then the other thing is a question, really, and this could go to Paulette also. Back in '75, when or actually 70 or whenever it was, when I went and studied the silver bordered bog fritillary at Moxie Bog, John told me exactly where to go. We thought at the time it might even be 3 brooded. Maybe there's a partial 3rd brood. But this was late in the year, lots and lots of butterflies, lots of islets. And so that was the time that I found them being preyed upon by Phimata, which are the ambush bugs. And I got one in my boot, and boy, I found out about ambush bugs in my foot. But it was, there were a lot of them, as you mentioned, a lot of islands. Well, change happened. But the main thing I want to ask you about this, the main nectar plant at the time was the blue porterweed. Can't remember the name of the genus. And I've found it elsewhere, Joseph Creek and elsewhere, being a very good native plant, nectar plant. And the picture in Watching Washington Butterflies of Silene marina is on that. So is that a native plant, that porterweed? Is it introduced? Is it still there? And do you find other scabland, wetland butterflies nectaring on that porterweed?
I don't know the weed. I don't know it at all.
Do you know, Paulette?
No, I don't.
Okay, you both have Watching Washington Butterflies. Take a look at the photograph of the marina in that book, and there's the flower. But the flower is a tower. It's a tall. It's not a spathe, but it's something like that. It's a columnar flower. It's a verbena, but that's not the genus. It's in the Verbenaceae. I just looked up the genus and I can't remember. Oh, here it is. Just a minute.
Stachytarfida.
Thank you. Who said that?
That was James Adams. But I cheated. I looked it up on Google just now.
James, you're too quick for the rest of us, man. That's it. Stacky what?
Tarfida. Stachytarfida.
That's it.
Jimicensis.
So does it indicate whether it's indigenous in this region?
Hold on.
He's useful, This boy's useful. But
the origin is southern Florida and the Caribbean. So
okay, thanks.
It is not native.
And it is pan-tropical because don't same species, but the same genus is an extraordinarily important pan-tropical weed nectar plant in Papua New Guinea and lots of other places. But remember that, John, how abundant it was at Moxie? And it was the main nectar plant, not only for the fritillaries, but also for wood nymphs and sandhill skippers and various other things.
Well, I don't think it's there now because we did a survey back in 2011 and we recorded all the plants. So I'll go back and look at that, but it doesn't ring any bells for me.
Okay, well, that's another one you want to look for coming back. And
Right.
I think the gentleman's with us you were talking about, who's going to be working on that out there.
Well, Herman has left the meeting, but yeah, he has a completely new vision for Moxie and a lot of energy, and so he's going to be having the goats out on the property. He's left now, otherwise I'd have him talk about it. But he's going to be putting the goats back out on the property in next May and August of 26.
Well, good. Well, y'all look for the Stachypartita too. That wasn't it. the porterweed. And all I can say is with the goats and everything he's doing, and you and others, you can't do any worse than we did. When Fayette Krause was the land steward for the Nature Conservancy, he tried a lot. He hired Merrill to come and work on it. And I was the previous land steward. That bog was my responsibility to manage. And it wasn't, and I had just been learning about David, you know all about this, the invasion of willow carr on Wicken Fen, Darwin's old fen, which extirpated the swallowtail from Wicken Fen in Britain. That was exactly what was going on at Moxie. And I had learned about it in England. I saw it happening at Moxie, but we seemed to be powerless to arrest it. So let's hope that that you're all able to do much better than we were able to do before. It wasn't the lack of management, it was the misunderstanding of what we had to do and how the management could be performed.
Yeah, misunderstanding.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was going to mention is that when it comes to butterflies, you can figure out exactly what they need, but exactly how to manage to get what you want is really, really difficult and varies from spot to spot. And then, of course, you have to have the people who are going to help you understand it too.
Yeah.
Because we have lots and lots of management in Georgia, and all I can say is that management is helter skelter. I'm a member of an advisory committee, and we advise people on, everything from burning to restoration projects and everything. And more often than not, it's impossible to get exactly what you want. And when it comes to moths, which are much, much more speciose, you manage for one, you mess up another one.
Yeah.
And so
And
it gets to be a really, really, really difficult thing to do appropriately.
And if you do get it right, and of course, there's a big background of this with the Mission Blue on San Bruno Mountain, half a century of monkeying around to try to get that right. But then if you do get it right and you happen not to screw up everything else, and in the dunes at Antioch, they got it exactly right for a while for the metal mark there, the Lang's metal mark, and then they wiped out all the other dune endemics doing it.
Exactly.
And now it's crashed and it's probably extinct. But if
Yeah.
you get it right, you gotta get it done year after year after year after year. And if you have turnover in the agencies, and then you have dosing and loss of people and everything else, it's real hard to keep the management regime going right.
Yep. New personnel to train all the time, and
So
some
David,
just do what they think is right and don't listen to anybody. So,
that's true. So David James, keep it going and keep on them.
and good luck with all the management if it
Well,
comes to that.
that's what happened at Sun Lake State Park with Yuma, wasn't it? With
Oh
the
man,
state parks, they'd forgotten. They knew about the Yuma skipper being there, but they'd lost their collective memory or something. New people didn't know about it. That's why they sprayed.
that's what happens. That happened with the Golden Hair Streak. You had a generation of people that John and I and Dave and others had educated to look for the chinkapin and to manage for the chinkapin. And then they were all gone. All of a sudden, they're coming to talk to us and say, "What's with this butterfly?" And they say, "Oh," and you start all over again. It's like Xerxes and others asking for the review year after year, and we gave that
The
information.
chicken pen is recovered, is doing quite well. Thank you.
Well, and then uh, Keith goes off and he finds more places than we ever knew before. So
Well, and that's one of the other take-home messages is that these butterflies and all the insects, and for that matter, you pick an organism, they were out there long before we were doing anything.
Right.
And so,
You think so?
in some respects, you think, should we even do anything? Now, obviously, for some, you need to do something. I mean, obviously, if you have one population of something, especially if human beings screwed it up in the first place, you want to try to fix it. But when you have something that's got scattered populations everywhere, you have natural succession going on, but another spot will open up. And you just hope the butterflies understand that they have to travel a little bit because, most things naturally disperse. And so you sometimes wonder, well, should we even manage this spot? And so anyway, it's just so complex. It kind of boggles the mind to think about what you have to go through to try to figure these things out.
And David, you remember what Roger Torrey Peterson said about the monarch when we first started to get him to help us out in the early monarch efforts. And Roger, everybody knows that name, I hope still, Roger Torrey Peterson. He said, I think the monarch will take care of itself. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's that's not what you said, David. But your message in the Bay Area, for example, has been so much more positive than others who were preaching that, oh, it's all gone in California. I maybe was one of them. And you said, hold on, this butterfly is resilient. And of course, it does prove to be that if the conditions allow. So we need to manage, but well, you've said it all.
So I'd like to get back to a different issue that David raised about collecting data. And Gary Bernard raised a point about whether it might be possible to engage people beyond our field trips. Do you want to talk about that, Gary, or?
No, it was just a simple idea that David had these points labeled geographically, and I was just wondering, well, do you have a feeling for prioritizing? Which one would you like to go to first? And if you could prioritize all those marks and share them with WABA, then we could descend on them and then give you feedback. But sort of, knowing, well, where should I go? And maybe you can help tell us where should I
that's
go and when.
that might work. I mean, that has crossed my mind too. I mean, I don't need to lead every trip. I could have a list of potential sites with a rating of how likely. Yeah, that's a good idea.
We could do both.
And if people want to do it, they can do it. They don't have to do it, but at least
Right.
it's there, and potentially somebody could do it. I mean, that idea came from the guy that was on my trip who went to look at Bob's old site, down on his own accord. I didn't ask him to. He just wanted to do it. So I think people are interested enough to do that. They will. So yeah, it's a good
I'd
idea.
like to get involved.
Well, you could be up there for some other reason. In fact, the guy that went
Well,
to
I would be.
yeah, the guy that went to Klickitat was there for some other reason. So he thought while he was there, he would look for the Uma skipper.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something we should think about.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank
you
you.
look at field trips, and so those are great. People can sign up, and you have lots of folks that lots of eyes on. But yeah, Gary's idea is to maybe expand that so that it doesn't require a field trip; they can do it on their
Yeah,
own.
it's just independent
Thank you.
trips. Yeah.
Well, and some of those maps you showed, you had so many pins in close proximity to one another for a couple of those species that somebody, a group could go and get 8 of them in one shot. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot of the places are very close together. So yeah.
Well, I would help out, but I'm 3,000
Yeah,
miles away.
yeah. It's a good
Next vacation, James. We'll count on you.
Paulette, there's a question from Toby Hasty, who seems to be a neighbor of David's. She says she's in the West Valley of Yakima and a novice, and she'd like some advice on
Yeah.
best
I
flowers.
sent a personal message. Basically, I don't know her. Is she still online? I'm not even sure. I suggested she go to our website and look at some of our videos because we have a number of gardening and pollinator videos. I know she's on the east side, or he or she is on the east side, but and I also suggested coming on field trips and just connecting with people one-on-one with questions because everybody's so friendly. So
Yeah, she's not with us anymore. She left.
yeah, okay, yeah. Anyway, I did respond to her. Thank you for bringing that up, Bob.
Good.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
Well, I wrote to David and told him that my rabbit brush run this year was crap again, just like last year. Almost nothing on the rabbit brush in the Columbia this year. Of course, it started out raining, but then it got warm. But I don't know. Used to be you could count on a fair number of Juba, and gray hair streaks and whites and others. And I'm always looking for the strays. But and there used to be a lot of diurnal moths. David, you said you had better luck with the rabbit brush farther north.
Yeah, it's been not as good a season as last year, but it's still been pretty good. It's still worth going out. I mean, you can sometimes go to Rabbit Rush, there's nothing, but then the next one's got like lots of stuff on. What I'm seeing a lot of is field skippers. They're continuing their march north. They're
Yeah.
now near Moses Lake. The guy
Or are they
today
almost to Moses? That's the
sent me
only
a picture.
species I found. That's the sole species I found. The
Oh.
only butterflies I found the whole day were on
Right,
a
okay.
zinnia patch in Bingen, but the rabbit rush was vacant.
No, the field skipper's becoming quite common.
Yeah.
In Yakima too. I mean, it hasn't been common in Yakima just until recently. So yeah, it's
Well, I put in big beds of marigolds and zinnias way down here in Grays River this year, still blooming, and the buddleia, and I'm looking every day for the first sachem in Wahkiakum County. Maybe it'll turn up.
So I have a more general question. I hope this is okay. Bob, David, you mentioned a site in along the Columbia that Bob then identified as Maryhill Mansion. And I guess Bob, you were saying that now it used to be a great stopping location, but it's not anymore. I was just wondering if you knew, for example, if they had been spraying or if you
No.
have an idea why it's
Well,
changed so much.
Thank you, Paulette. It's a garden. Do you know the mansion
Yeah.
up there on the bluff, not the bluff, on the lava flow, overlooking Sam Hill's mansion where Queen of Romania finally took residence, so on and so forth. Great museum. But behind it, there's this rectangular garden that's edged by rows of trees. And it was a difference in planting and gardening philosophy. I tried to contact the managers and the owners, not the owners, State Park, but the managers. But they had a, I think it was just a matter of happenstance that it was so good for butterflies, but they had a lot of buddleia. And it wasn't all Davidii, it was the yellow ones, the white ones, quite a range of buddleias. And I think it was probably because of the state listing of buddleia as noxious. That's mostly the adventitious Davidii, but they took them all out. But that's not the only one. There were a lot of mints, there were a lot of low border plants, herbaceous borders. It was much more varied, even though almost none of it was native plants. And I think they got on a native plant jag and they put in a bunch of native plants, which is great, but they had almost no nectar, and there weren't native plants that anything local used. And so the garden went from being an extremely attractive magnet where you would find moving butterflies like hunter's butterfly, West Virginia, American ladies and monarchs. And then bizarrely, this little Yuma colony on the Miscanthus, but other things too. And as I say, I was studying monarch movements in those days, and it was right below that on the tracks where the maintenance road goes along the railroad tracks just before the Biggs Bridge, off of 97 by the big fruit stand there. And that first mile, which had no butterflies the other day, but it was the rabbit brush there was thick, and the monarchs would collect there. And that's where I actually, the first time of two, watched a monarch butterfly cross the Columbia River, one side to the other, saw it the whole way. But it had come down off the cliff from Maryhill. And I used to write to David about that. The monarchs would come into the garden there off of the plateau. There's certain places they collect. There's a place by Roosevelt with both species of milkweed, and there was a lot of nectar there, porterweed and things. And I call it the fish patch. And that's where they would always congregate. But they would come and they would not only breed there, but they'd feed up there, they'd tank up before crossing the river, which is their big trial. And they've all got to do it at some point. And those places they did. It was just change of management. Same thing with what you were talking about before, James and others, that personnel changes, philosophy changes, and institutional memory dies, and nobody knew what. So I tried to instruct them, and here was a great butterfly garden, but
Yeah.
Well, that brings up an important point about we tell people to plant natives, plant natives, plant natives, but not all natives are created equal. It's
No.
actually a pretty small percentage of the native flora that supports the local wildlife. And for nectar plants, most insects don't really care if the nectar plant is native or not. It's the floral architecture, it's the season, it's the quality of the nectar. It's those kinds of things. So there are certain natives that are really good for wildlife, and then there are others that are no better than boxwood, really.
Yeah, and people are beginning to be unafraid to say that.
Well, it's so easy to follow a bumper sticker, and
Yes, yes.
That's all right. And I've been in. I've
Go ahead, David.
Sorry, James. I've had some.
I said, go ahead, David. Oh, no, whoever.
Thank you, James. I've had some battles with my buddies at Xerxes, as John and others know. I don't always fall lockstep with them, but I also have zero authorities. Just another member and advisor. But we, of course, got in a big fight about the potential listing of the large marble. But let's not talk about that. But another one that I've struggled a little bit with Xerxes is that they became acolytes of Doug Tallamy. Now, Doug Tallamy is a very well-known writer and conservationist, botanist, and all. His books are extremely popular, and he's done a whole lot of good for native plants and for nectar and pollinators. But he's doctrinaire about natives, and he would state in an unqualified way that natives are better. and he'll claim to produce research showing that. But the research is extremely targeted, and so on. And so Xerxes kind of bought that line for a while. They're getting better that way. But as you say, Paulette and Regina, that's exactly right. And as I said in the chat, John Shepard opened our eyes about knapweed decades ago about how it totally enabled not only the spread of sandhill skippers, but the entire facultative second brood. John Pelham showed us that very same thing in the 60s and 70s in Seattle with fennel and anise swallowtails. And there's lots of other examples. So thank goodness we're starting to be able to talk about this without feeling like that we are heretics.
I've read a couple of his books, and a lot of what he's saying in his books is based on research by his students, not by him, which he doesn't really point out in the book. And I was actually at a restoration webinar during the pandemic, and it was this young woman at UMass, I think, talking about native plants, which native plants are good for native wildlife. And she was basically breaking it down to like 10 or 11 genera of plants that are the best hosts for invertebrates. And somebody in the chat all but accused her of plagiarism for plagiarizing Doug Tallamy. And like, no, I'm sorry. She's the one whose research he was using in his book. But she's young and she's Latina, so she can't possibly be the author of this information.
Right. Exactly. Well, now there's a lot of pollinator festivals. And by the way, when I say I fight with Xerxes a little, I still think they're the bee's knees. I mean, 75 young staff members all over the country working on pollinator conservation, doing wonderful things. So don't get me wrong. But there are a lot of pollinator festivals and programs now, and some of them are close enough to me that they haul me in as a dinosaur to talk about these things. So I've done that down in Seaside, and I did a big one down in Vancouver this summer. And I start my presentation or come in pretty close. I said, now you're not going to want to hear this. And then I hit the value of the non-native plants. I got worried in Colorado yesterday. I was out of my old colonies on the Highline Canal that made me a naturalist, made me a lepidopterist. And there's a lot of beautiful ash trees, and they're native there. The same species probably that are used as shade trees here all over eastern Washington, Fraxinus viridis. And it's a very important food plant, as you all know, for our biggest butterfly, the double-tails, the two-tailed tiger swallowtails. And their range and their numbers are vastly greater than they would ever have been in pre-contact times because of that tree. But that tree, omnipresent in hot, arid Western North America now, Calgary to Mexico City and the butterfly with it, is being hit by the emerald ash borer. And there's the possibility that we could lose a whole lot of those ashes and all across the West, and then we'll be back to cherry trees for the double-tails, and they might become a little more scarce again.
So Allison, do you want to weigh in on one of your faves?
Oh, well, mostly I was just listening, but I was thinking, and I see it looks like Karen Holtrop got off the talk, but she was able to get a little patch of plantain protected in a parking area for the checker spot butterfly. And
oh, good
so it's
for her.
funny to go there and be like, oh, here we are protecting this little patch of weeds, but
yep.
Otherwise those little caterpillars were getting run over by people parking. And so that's why it was done.
Yay, Karen.
Yay, Karen.
I also had a question, and I might have missed this, but the juniper hair streak and the cedar hair streak, are they both Nelsonite? And are they both on the list for the state, or are they different populations that you're thinking about?
Did Pellman go away?
I don't see him on.
Oh, it's too bad you didn't ask when John is probably the only one among us who can give you the current rundown on that crazy genus of, we used to call them Mytura, and that's now a subgenus of Calophrys. But those particular elphoids, their taxonomy has been just about as complicated as anything you can imagine. And it seems simple back in watching Washington Butterfly Days. And then uh, Kurt Johnson came along and kind of redid the taxonomy of that genus in the Northwest and created those new names, Burnii and Plicateria and the others, kind of reset the stage. And then John Lane and others have worked on it a lot. And then along came Paul Hammond, our good friend, Fritillary Authority and sulfurs down at Oregon State. And I think it was he, among a couple of others, who decided that they actually all belong to Graineus, the eastern olive hair streak. Siva and Nelsoni and almost all the other Mituras were actually Graineus. So the past 20, 30 years, you've been seeing them on the list that way, and then subspecies. But now the tides are shifting again, and DNA studies, of course, have dramatically shifted the scene. Not that all of the DNA researchers agree with one another, but that's a rather poor summary. And John Pelham, I'm afraid, is the keeper of the catalog, and he's the one who discerns the differences among the current research and so on, and makes the has the unenviable role of making a judgment as to what's going to go on the catalog. And I guess, as David says, David, maybe you know more about this, but Nelsoni, which we had banned from the States, now seems to be coming back into its own as the species. But we do know that we have the different entities of the juniper feeding east side things, which are also maybe, well, they're on the west side in the islands. And then we also have the western red cedar feeding things, the Plicateria or the cedar hair streak. And then, but do we have others as well? Then when you get down into Oregon and California, and you have the things feeding on the incense cedar and on the Muir's hair streak, which is on the other cupressus in California, the Sargentii and so on, that's probably a real species. But I don't want to say your guess is as good as mine. I'm sure it is, but there are some facts here, but they're hard to parse, and certainly not settled yet.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to return briefly to a topic we were talking about a little bit ago about the non-natives, because I have a parallel situation. I know David was trying to say something about 10 minutes ago and didn't get started, but I was doing this survey on Sapelo Island, and two of the absolute best nectar sources for butterflies on the island were escaped lantana and escaped privet, both non-native. And we did a butterfly survey before we did the moth survey, and all of that lantana provided us with the vast majority of our butterfly records. And then, of course, the ligustrum did a lot for our hair streak numbers. And they have now since, they haven't removed all the ligustrum, but they've gone in and removed a lot of the lantana. And so all these butterflies that you used to be able to see, you don't see them anymore. And so, I used to go, non-natives, get rid of them. But I'm kind of the mind that I got the impression from a lot of people here that, they have their place. So, I mean, they get there, and it may be us that brought them there, but they do well in the habitat, and they're certainly good in some respects for the insect fauna that's there. So
yeah, and there's three great stories of irony that if people just can't quite get with this because they've been on the ideological, it becomes ideological, and the reason is to fight these things, and by gum, I do. The so-called silver nettle or yellow archangel. Lamium, Lamium, the one, the terrible, terrible, terrible adventitious plant. But they're not demons, they're plants doing what they're evolved to do. But you almost have to demonize them and get militant in order to fight them. Just about took over my whole place. But we're getting them now. So I know what fighting them's all about. But here's three stories I tell people if they just can't get behind this reasoning. One of them is the Western migratory monarch, right, David, could possibly be extinct. And John Lane taught us this a long time ago. We might not have the Western migratory phenomenon in any kind of robustness had it not been for the introduction of eucalyptus. Okay, that's one. Another one, and of course, a lot of their winter nectar too, ivy, German ivy, and others are non-natives. Okay, another one, of course, is the great discovery in 1998 by John Fleckenstein on San Juan Island at American Camp of the now federally listed, now as an appropriate marble listing, headed up by Xerxes. And that, of course, is the island marble. And it's completely endemic as a species, as far as we know, in not very many acres on San Juan Island. And it's an endangered species. Park Service owns the land, but by gum, when it was discovered there, it was feeding almost entirely on non-native mustards that the Park Service was engaged in trying to remove. And so the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, state parks, Xerxes, everybody involved in that, all of a sudden has to be in the business of trying to protect the non-native mustards. Tia and I found the very first native food plant for it, the Puget Sound peppergrass, but it barely uses it at all.
Right, right.
And then the third one is, well, of course, David and the purple loosestrife with monarchs, which the viceroys use a great deal too in Washington. And I can't remember the other one, but there's these great ironies of things that wouldn't even be there
Right.
if it weren't for the natives.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point to bring up, David, is the value of the non-natives, especially later in the season. So glad you really hit on that hard.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, at least you guys don't have to deal with kudzu.
Well, there's
That's
that.
one we really want to get rid of in the South.
Oh man, you take a look at a place like Cairo, Illinois. The only thing you can see is an entire landscape of kudzu. But you know what uses it and becomes super abundant is the silver spotted skipper.
Yes, it does.
I
Yes,
was
it
at
does.
really a pollinator garden in right on the river at what was the old labor town in West Virginia that made the movie about it? Mateworth, Mateland, something like that. And they had a historic labor thing. Also, the Hatfield and McCoy Museum is there. And they had this butterfly garden on the riprap going down to the river. But there was a whole lot of kudzu, thousands of silver spotted skippers because of the kudzu.
Mate one.
Matewan, thank you. Yeah. Of course, it's not rare, but still.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been a great presentation, David, a lot of information, and of course, we'll have it available as a recording too. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, David. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.
I always love hearing your talks, David. Thanks for sharing. So
Thanks.
good to see you, Bob. Good to see you, John, and everybody else.
Next, before we go, I just want to mention next month it's Bob, and he's gonna give his what do you call it? Anyway,
A Pylean potpourri on fortified in silver, copper, and blue.
Right.
Yeah,
Nice.
Yeah.
So that'll be next month. So okay,
David, I want you to come and talk as much as I did at your talk tonight.
Yeah.
And you too, James.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
It's only 11:15 where I am, so it's time for me to go to bed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you next month. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.